This is not a foreign invader from a far-off land. This is the Southern Pine Beetle.
I wish we could control it a little bit better than we have.
For me, it's a giant accident waiting to happen.
The tunnels that were left behind, all these holes, one right after another, each one, symbolic of another beetle that was coming in. And as you can see, these holes are all the way up the tree.
I think it's worsening, but it seems to have leveled off now because just about everything is dead. I mean, it's amazing what's lying around dead. It's really kind of scary. Yeah.
Climate change has driven SPB up the coast. Our winters are no longer cold enough to kill a lot of these invasive insects and pests.
I call this as a first call to action. It's been 10 years. 10 years. And we've watched our forest be decimated, our pine forest, over those 10 years. What are we going to do?
Would have been 2014. You would have been in Hubbard County Park, which is part of Suffolk County. That's out near the Peconic River area. That's where it was first noticed, but by 2015 it was popping up in other places throughout the Pine Barrens, and ever since then it's been an issue. So it's spread, but we're in the ballpark of around 3,000 acres that have been lost. All right, so we talk about the damage, right? So again, the Southern Pine Beetle, it's 2 to 4 millimeters. But if we actually look at the damage of the tree, now this is one that's come down, but we can see the actual boring holes and how deep they get into the stem of the tree, where it's literally a couple of inches in, and we're digging through all the xylem, all the phloem, all the channels that the tree is moving nutrients and water through, and the beetle is in here. I mean, a lot of this is just sawdust that's caked on, but it's at least helping them point out just how devastating this beetle can be. The pine borers, you can see again up here, where it's like massive cavities that are being left in the tree, which is why it's dying. It's a pure, I mean, I say a death by 1,000 cuts, but this is more like death by 10,000 cuts, because it disrupts everything in the tree, and that's why they come down. But this is a perfect example where you can see this tree's been infected by the beetle, but it's also been infected by a fungus. And that you can see here in this dark staining. It's called a blue stain fungus, as evidenced by, well, it's pretty plain and simple as why we call it the blue stain virus, or the fungus. But this is also now, so we have this tree who is not only combating the beetle, but that beetle brings in and allows this fungus to then come in, and now the tree is being attacked on multiple levels. And here we can even see some of the pitch resin that was left just oozing out of this tree. This area overlays the underground aquifers that supply the drinking water to all the communities that are out here in Suffolk County. So environmental issues that impact the land are going to have a direct impact on the water under the land. So just from a basic environmental perspective, the communities have a real vested interest in making sure that their environment in their neighborhoods is as healthy as it possibly can be, because that directly impacts their water quality and their quality of life.
We have a number, we live in a reserve area, so our home is surrounded by dead, lying on the ground pine trees. And the ones that were actually on our property, we removed 5 years ago, but we were told we couldn't remove the ones in the reserve. So in view of all the fires of late surrounding, Suffolk County, and now there's one in New Jersey, we're concerned about, if a fire starts, what is going to happen to our home. And it's compounded with the fact that sometimes we run out of water on our road. So that's a real concern, that there's going to be a fire and that will be a day when we have no water available to our home.
So pine beetle is kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It's kind of telling us, see what happens when you have climate change? You have southern pine beetles in the northern part of our country. It's not the right thing. Wow, how did that happen? So unless we take notice.
So our ability to remove trees is not ideal, but we're doing as much as we can, and that's why I'm here to find different techniques to be more successful with our work.
We go in and we're doing these mechanical treatments, get it all set up. Brian Gallagher comes in, looks at it, says this will be great for a burn. We can eat up the rest of these fuels, and then he schedules a burn. So we start out with these mowed areas here. We come in and put a fire in, and the result is a much greener, healthier, you're gonna love it, beautiful pine barrens. It's gonna be a little bit more barren.
Right now, our only way of addressing this is to cut down some of these trees and hope that by doing so it doesn't spread. I don't know if that works. We should definitely analyze how effective that is.
But using that aerial imagery, we could see areas that were being impacted by the pine beetle because the trees were dying. And you would see it in different stages of death. So the ones that were gone, where the initial attack happened, those were already, grayed out and dead. But then you'll see a perimeter in which direction the beetles are moving as you start to see pines that are where the needles are starting to brown. And then you'll see areas where the green isn't quite so vibrant, right? And so you can see which trees have recently gotten infected, the green not so vibrant, where the beetle is actively taking the tree down, or maybe has already killed the tree, and that's where the pine needles are brown themselves, and the gray trees that are already dead. So when they were able to identify that from an aerial image, they could go in, locate it on the ground. And again, from that period, from about 2014 to 2022, the attack approach was to go in and start cutting trees down. And the idea was to then get into that neighboring area where the beetle hadn't infected and actually cut some of those trees down to, again, thin the forest. Get the pines further and further away from each other so the pheromone trail doesn't work. And then at the same time, you're cutting down trees that have active infestation, and you're doing things like this, limbing and bucking, so that you're exposing the tree to warmer temperatures, which is not conducive, and the tree's now cut, and so it's no longer flowing food, and that can help kill off some of the beetle. But the damage has been done. This system is really unique in that because it was so dry, it is evolved with fire. These systems, natural wildfire came through these systems quite a bit, but also indigenous people, the Native Americans that inhabited Long Island long before colonial times, used fire to help rejuvenate the forest. That was for hunting reasons, for harvesting reasons. Those drier conditions where you have less soil moisture being retained allows the vegetation itself to dry out, which is then conducive to fire. The fire helps also weed out some of those other species that would compete with the pines. Now the pitch pines are actually really adapted to fire, and they actually require fire because of the way they propagate. So if we're looking around, we can see all these cones, a lot of them, they're all really tight. And and that's because they haven't burned. And so the resins within the pine cones itself haven't literally melted and dripped off in the heat of the fire, which then opens up the pine cones and allows them to release their seeds. So it's the species that is literally waiting for the forest to burn. As we get away from vegetation and we start looking at some of the salamanders that survive out here, they're primarily underground species. So when the fire does come through, they're underground, they're unharmed. They've got an adaptation to that fire regime that's going to come into their system on occasion. They've got a way to survive it. The trees and other plants require that fire to come in and open up the forest canopy, allow the sun to shine in, allow those seeds to germinate. And so, yeah, it's this wonderful, self-reliant system that propagates itself. And when it doesn't, so when we don't burn, such as for a good period of our history where it was Smokey the Bear telling us, only you can prevent forest fires, right? Where we weren't burning. Well, the forest wasn't okay with that. The forest, fire-dependent forest systems are going to stack the deck in their favor, and they do that by increasing the amount of vegetation that's ready to burn, so that when the system does dry out and that spark does catch, the fire is going to rip through it all, because there's all this fuel, all this ability to burn and burn hot and burn long and burn wide.
Prescribed fire really ties everything back into a healthy forest, right? And that's what we're going for here. That's what the Southern Pine Beetle indicates, is that this was an unhealthy forest. We burn impacted areas differently than unimpacted, because health is kind of subjective in that way, and the Southern Pine Beetle indicates one thing, but we haven't really burned enough in those areas to really have a basis for that. So the way to further that thought process too is, are these proactive steps or are these reactive steps? As far as the impacted areas that we do have, the Southern Pine Beetle impacted areas that we have seen and we are burning in, we are going to need to require a new strategy to deal with the heavier fuels that are left over, right? When we burn, we're burning off all those 10 and 100-hour fuels, all the light stuff that's on top, right? But what's left with those big trunks and those big bowls that are left over, and that's going to require some more management practices.
So, Southern Pine Beetle moves through pheromone attraction, and pheromones caught in the wind dissipate. So when you have pitch pines that are really dense, really close to each other, you end up with a situation that's conducive to the Southern Pine Beetle being successful in its strategy, which is to attack a tree, fly to the next tree, use the pheromones to tell the other pine beetles to come on over here, this is where our next meal is. And they move from tree to tree to tree, which is kind of what happened here, why there's so many dead trees around here. The one thing that the public really needs to be aware of is letting us know if they see an invasion, especially if it's in their property or things like that. Let us know. That's always a huge help. But number two is knowing when you can and when you can't cut. That's going to be a huge issue for us because of the other species that are involved. So that's another key part of the awareness. But more so than that is to just become more understanding of the system that you're living in, and understanding what the threats are and why environmental scientists such as myself try to take these issues really, really seriously, because they are really serious. And if we end up with a system that falls apart, whether it's from an invasive species itself, this is, again, it's probably not the best way to phrase it, this is not an invasive species. It's an invasion from a native species, and it's not in its native habitat, so that's what's throwing our system off.
We're talking space, nutrients, competition, and fire adaptogenetics, right? So circling back to those same concepts of building resiliency and building a healthier forest, that's what this forest knows and grew on. So the fact that we've been here suppressing these fires and not doing any other mitigation work is what's causing some of the problems. Considering prescribed fire and trying to promote prescribed fire, we're trying to be more proactive, right? Hopefully before SPB infests them. So what do we know that helps reduce the southern pine beetle spread and their infestation is airflow, right? So we're talking not necessarily fire, but the other management practices that we do here as well, right? So the fuel thinning, the forest thinning, we're increasing the airflow and allowing that pheromone dispersion to occur so that the southern pine beetles don't find such a populace and are not able to infest a tree or an area as a whole. So the Central Pine Barrens is a fire-prone and fire-adapted ecosystem, right? We have a long history of wildfire as well as cultural fire. We need the public to understand the ecology of this forest. We need them to be more comfortable with fire as a tool for forest management, especially in the sense of prescribed fire operations. We have contingencies, fire breaks, and prescriptions, all of which are intended to protect property and health. With increased droughts and unplanned extreme weather events, intensity, frequency, and timing of these wildfires and extreme weather events is only increasing.
Don't take the woods for granted, right? This is not a moment to sit back and say, somebody else will fix it. Be aware of what's going on. Understand that, some of these issues, like with the southern pine beetle, if this is happening in proximity to your house, some of these trees can come down, right? That becomes a threat to your health, to your safety. It's part of the reason why in this area these trees have been cut down. It's for safety reasons. We don't want trees this massive coming crashing down on people. And this is a public area. So just be aware of your surroundings. If you do see a dead tree, some of the signs that the tree is really in bad shape. If there's missing bark, for example, if there's fungus growing out of the tree, those are all really key signs that your tree isn't doing well. And it could become a hazard.